Ahead and get started today. As Melissa noted, please do reach out using chat or Q&A at any time. We are happy to take questions throughout the presentation, though we have carved out some time at the end of the presentation for question and answer as well. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and particularly for those who may have been registered for the first time. We tried to have this webinar, and while several were waiting in the waiting room and we were waiting in the panelist presenter room, Zoom had a widespread outage that affected most states in the US, and we could not get together as planned. So thank you to those. We appreciate that you tried to log on. We do apologize, although this one was on Zoom, and we are fingers crossed today continues as smoothly as it has been so far. Hello, welcome. Yes, please do drop in chat. We appreciate that. So today, I will be your moderator, Stacey Charamonti. I am here with UPCEA. My colleagues Bruce Etter and Enyu Zhou are going to be presenting for you today. Unfortunately, Alessandro Reggio was not able to join us and so we will do our best to cover Alessandro's slides. However, we know that he will be available for questions, and you will see his contact information at the end of the presentation as well. So today, our focus really will be on providing research-driven insights and some actionable strategies to really help with the key challenges that we face in graduate and professional education. We're going to start with Bruce, who's going to talk about historical and current trends in graduate education, and really spend a little time on the 2024 Prospective Postbac Student Survey. Then we'll turn over to Enyu, and she'll take us through understanding the roles of master's education in the STEM workforce. And again, have time for questions, but please do feel free to use the chat and Q&A. I will be turning over to Bruce now to kick us off, and I'll be monitoring chat and Q&A for our presenters throughout the session. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacey, and hello, everyone. Good afternoon, guten Tag, good day. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to start this off with a slide that you've probably seen before. If you've seen either myself or Jim Fong speak, you've definitely seen this chart, right? So since 2010, we went from about 21 million to about 18.4 million total undergraduate students, right? A little bit of a decrease there, or a considerable decrease. I saw earlier this year a Hechinger Report article that said institutions are admitting a larger portion or proportion of their applicants than they did 20 years ago. And recall that, we added more high school grads during this time period, but fewer were choosing to go to college, right? And so what I'd like to especially highlight here is that the graduate market has remained relatively flat during this period, right? So we're adding more bachelor's degree graduates. We should be having more growth here, but it's been limited, right? But there have been some more positive signs recently, right? So if we zoom in a little bit more and a little less from that longer longitudinal side, this data is from National Student Clearinghouse, their most recent current enrollment estimates, a mouthful and a half, for the fall of 2024. And that was released this January. And what we can see here is a clear general uptick in enrollments for both master's degrees as well as graduate certificates, right? Master's degrees have gained around approximately 163,000 enrollments between the fall of 19 and the fall of 24, while graduate certificate enrollments have increased about 20,000. And so I think while there's reason for optimism for both charts, I think we're going to see graduate certificates play an increasingly important role, particularly in what happens with master's degree enrollments, right? As we know, more and more students are kind of leaning towards stackable education rather than some of these all or nothing propositions. So one of the pieces of note for the current and future graduate enrollment pipeline is the increasing prevalence of online learning. This is kind of a duh slide to a lot of you, but for those who may not be aware, we'll just touch on some of this. And so while the pandemic accelerated the trend by a considerable margin, there are more students at all credential levels enrolled in at least one online course than there are enrolled in no online courses, right? And so when we talk about specifically what does this mean for the graduate market, 39% of graduate students are enrolled in exclusively online programs, while 26% of undergraduate students are. So online offerings are going to continue to increase in importance for institutions as students show a clear increasing demand for them, right? However, these enrollments, at least historically, have not been distributed equally, right? So this is IPEDS data that EAB analyzed from fall of 2020, which I think is an incredibly important caveat, fall of 2020. But it shows that 1 in 7 graduate online students attended one of the, what I'll call online mega institutions, right? And it isn't really a surprise that these institutions are able to capture such a significant market share, given this volume of resources that they have and the money that they're investing into marketing specifically. So in 2020, for example, Grand Canyon University spent $164 million in marketing. Let that number sink in for a moment. And to put that in comparison, right, UPCEA's 2020 marketing study found an average annual marketing budget for online and professional continuing education units at 826,000, right? Fast forward to 2024, when we most recently did that study, and that number is 1.2 million. Together, though, that's still almost 1% of that Grand Canyon budget, right? And the purpose of this data and me kind of bringing that up is not to pick on mega institutions, but to illustrate kind of current distribution of online graduate students, right? And while there is some data out there that suggests other institutions are beginning to capture some of those enrollments, there's still a considerable top-heavy institutional balance, right? And so despite this existing distribution, our UPCEA's 2024 Benchmarking Online Enterprises study, which we lovingly call BONES, it surveys chief online learning officers. It found that 60% said student demand for graduate online programs is increasing at their institution, right? So they're seeing it on the local level. Nationwide, this trend is holding true. We saw a 5.6% increase in graduate school applications between fall of 22 and fall of 23. So again, another positive sign. That bone study that I also mentioned identified that 67%, two-thirds of colos, said that their institution expects to obtain a greater market share of the online marketplace in the next 3 years, right? So while we're seeing some increasing demand, there's definitely going to be increasing supply, right? And so with those two factors combined with the fact that we're already top heavy, it's essential that institutions are interested in graduate markets, that they develop their enrollment funnels around learner preferences and learner needs. And this slide, it's busy. There's a lot of data on this slide, but the main takeaway here is that adult learners are becoming more selective, right? So while higher education has largely been slow, in my opinion, to adapt to emerging technologies, in particular AI, students, and particularly online students, are adjusting their expectations of engagement and their ability to access information. So online college students are shortening both the time they take to research prospective schools and the number of prospective schools that they considered, right? So according to Education Dynamics, they're engaging the Modern Learner Report, which if you haven't read, as soon as we hang up today, I strongly recommend you go pick up a copy of that. 84% of graduate students are considering 3 or fewer schools during their initial search, right? That's an incredibly small subset. And they're looking for these schools via traditional search engines like Google, which is leading to school websites, but they're also using AI for information gathering. And furthermore, search generative experience responses, so think, your AI summaries, are even further impacting those consideration sets, right? And the speed at which all of this is happening is critical and also incredibly fast. So just over half of graduate students said they spent 3 weeks or less building their initial consideration set and sending out those inquiries. We're going to talk a little bit more about speed and time later, but keep those data points in mind. So this is from our 2024 prospective post-bac student survey that we did in collaboration with Collegius. And so just a very brief overview of the demographics of these learners. If you'd like to see more, strongly encourage you to download the report. We've got a QR code at the end of this section, or you can send me a note. I'd be happy to send it your way. But for this study, respondents had to be between the ages of 18 to 64. They had to have at least a bachelor's degree, and they had to be at least somewhat interested in pursuing a graduate program. And not surprisingly, as age increased, the percentage of individuals interested in pursuing a post-bac education decreased. So with that setup in place, let's dive into the meat of some of the study. So there were some kind of surprising results about the importance of brand in prospective students searching for a graduate program. So when we asked them to rank factors in order of their importance when searching for a program, the specific program of study had the highest percentage who said, yeah, this is the top thing for me. 54% said this was first. 28% said the institution, and then the delivery method of the program was 18%. So it's interesting to note that nearly half, 47% of respondents ranked the institution as the least important factor, right? And this isn't to suggest that brand is not important. It absolutely is. But it may not be the thing that brings someone to our institution, right? So it still has a considerable value, but it's falling behind those others just a touch, right? And one of the main interests we had within this study was understanding if an institution was lucky enough to be in that initial very small consideration set. Remember, I mentioned most are doing 3 or less. What information are they willing to provide when they inquire? And the answer is essentially only the pieces of information an institution would need to contact them again, right? So that's things like name, first name, email, and last name. Only 42% are willing to share their address or date of birth, fields that I regularly see when reviewing institutional RFI forms. And so while this creates an admittedly small hurdle for the learner, it does give them reason to look elsewhere, right? And additionally, if they don't want to provide that information and we require it, what is the quality of the data that we're getting out of it, right? What is that going to look like? And are we gathering data that we can make decisions on? It's not to say those data points aren't important, but maybe that's not the first piece of information that we ask for. So this slide highlights some of the main reasons for disengagement among graduate students at 2 key stages of the enrollment funnel, the inquiry stage and the application stage. And the information and gathering or inquiry stage, the top reason for disengagement was not being able to find basic information, such as program cost, right? And this is something that is very much within institutional control and has the ability to drive away or attract learners. Now, I'll be very clear, I'm not advocating for a race to the bottom in terms of price, but rather effectively evaluating and communicating the unique value propositions of your program, right? Other common reasons for disengagement at this stage include not being able to find contact information for a program, which happens a shockingly often amount, and being required to provide too many personal details, right, which we just talked about there. So these are some of the reasons why some of these folks are going to disengage at that inquiry stage. At the application stage, 45%, so just under half, are saying they're going to disengage if the application fees are too expensive. And application fees are an interesting one to me. I would ask yourself 2 questions. What is the percentage of your budget that these fees actually account for? And is your institution in the recruitment business or the selection business? And if you're in the recruitment business, which most institutions are, it's worth considering what that fee structure looks like, pardon me. I was just on a webinar a few weeks ago talking about this study with my friend Tracy Chapman, who's at Collegiate Education, and she said that at her previous institution, their applications increased considerably after they dropped the application fee, which was nominal, right? I think it was somewhere between $50 to $100. But when they dropped that, they saw an uptick in the number of applications that they got, and the quality, most importantly, of those applicants did not change, right? So I think that's an interesting anecdotal point. The 2 other main reasons for disengagement at this stage are uncertainty of how to pay for the program and a confusing application process. So again, keep in mind the pieces that we can truly control. So when students do submit an application to a graduate program, 40% expect to hear back within a week or less. That's pretty darn fast. And in total, 92% expect to hear back within a month. Is that the case at your institution? I'm without seeing anyone, I'm guessing there are some nods and some shakes of the head. And it's an important one that we need to consider, right? And the reason it's so important is that roughly 3/4 of graduate students said they enroll at the school that admits them first, right? So this is something where it's potentially within our operating controls, and we need to control what we can control for these learners. So the good news with the majority of the findings from this study, there we go. But yeah, the good news from the majority of findings of these studies, my computer had a moment there, is that a lot of this is within our control, right? Initial inquiry stage are primarily related, the issues there are primarily related to website content, right? Program page content. And later in the inquiry stage, there's opportunity to review processes and requirements through the lens of the prospective student, right? Consider why application fees are in place, what data is used to set the fees. I talked about that institutional example earlier. The application process, right? How do we engage a few individuals outside of the institution to go through the process, document their experience, and learn from it, right? I think a lot of the times we have this very insular view of it's set up for reason A, B, and C for the institution, but not as often is it considered what does it actually look like for the student, right? Another piece is around letters of recommendation. Particularly for master's programs, I'd be curious to know how often an applicant is denied admission due to a letter of recommendation, right? Typically they're going to pick someone who writes a glowing review. The reviews are going to look very similar, and very rarely are you going to see a negative one. So is that something that adds value to the process for the institution still? Maybe, maybe not. And then those response delays that we mentioned as well, right? The considerable percentage that are enrolling at the institution that admits them first. The urgency cannot be understated there. So this is an incredibly busy slide that even though you're at your computer, you may not be able to maybe not be able to read all of. But there's a wealth of knowledge within this post-bac student survey here. And the final report of findings that highlight the preferences at each pivotal moment of these prospective learners along their stage. I've placed a QR code here if folks have interest in learning more about this study. Again, there's infinitely more than we have time to get into today. But I do want to pass it over to my colleagues at CGS to talk about a study that they recently conducted around the role of master's degrees in the field of STEM, which is an increasingly important one, particularly for international students. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Enyo.
Thank you, Bruce and Stacy. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. We are very excited to be here with you all this afternoon and share some insights from the Council of Graduate Schools Master's Exit Survey project. Before I started, I wanted to acknowledge that this project is funded by the National Science Foundation. So, as we know, most graduate students, in fact, about 75 to 80% of all graduate students in the US are master's students. And when this project first started, we really wanted to understand both the research and some practical issues of graduate education. In particular, to understand the role of master's program in workforce development. While most of the research on career pathways focus on doctoral students, and less research is done on master's career pathways. This project really want to achieve two things. One is to expand our understanding of master's students' career pathways to STEM workforce. And secondly, this project would give institutions opportunities for program improvement in ways that could support graduate students. As a community, one of the goals of this project is to collect master's student information and to inform graduate students and prospective students. And so another goal of this project really is to demonstrate the public value of graduate education. And we think at this point, these data points are particularly important for us. Just kind of go over some background of the survey. To answer the research questions, we developed and conducted a master's exit survey at 13 participating institutions in the US, including both doctoral institutions and master's institutions. So over the course of this project, participating institutions collected data with survey developed by CGS, and CGS collects this aggregated data from these institutions. The survey has over 10,500 responses with a response rate at about 25 to 30%. It was administered to master's degree granting students in both STEM and non-STEM fields. The data was collected from 2022 to 2023 in 3 waves. And the survey was conducted online by Qualtrics. And next slide, please. So looking at the data, there were several key findings that we learned from the project of what we thought would be interesting points to share with you all. As we know, micro-credentials and certificates are receiving increasingly attention as a way for reskilling and upskilling. So we would like to share some data points on certificate enrollment and the role they play in entering into master's degree programs. And we also look at master's students' transition in and out of STEM fields, trying to understand to what extent the students from non-STEM fields may use their master's degree to transition to STEM fields. Or for students who had a bachelor's degrees in STEM, may choose to continue to a STEM master's, or they may leave STEM fields to something else. So we know that so many NSF projects are STEM focused, but this project really wanted to look beyond just the STEM fields and focus all field of studies. And finally, we would like to share some data on master's aspiration and program satisfaction. Next slide. As Bruce mentioned earlier, so we know that over the past several years, there has been an increase in enrollment and number of degree awarded in graduate certificates. So while relatively little is known about the enrollment patterns of these certificates and who is pursuing certificates. So among the survey respondents, we found that about 21% of them indicated that they were pursuing a certificate. And in terms of race, ethnicity, and gender, we found that a larger share of African American master's students reported that they were pursuing certificates compared to the other racial groups. And also we saw that there is a larger share of women master's students reported that they were pursuing certificates compared to men. So this data shows that there are many students that are pursuing certificates or using certificates as an add-on to their master's degree. And certificates can be served as a professional development opportunities to upskill or reskill for graduate students. And in terms of certificate earning pattern, we found that more than a quarter, about 26.6% of respondents reported that having at least one certificate prior to starting their master's programs. And just over 45% of them reporting having no certificate gain at all throughout their education. And this means that more than half of the respondents had at least one certificate by graduation from their master's program. And in addition, more than 20.3% of the respondents reported that they are working on a certificate while also working towards their master's degree. And this data shows that students pursue certificates at different stages of their education, which raise questions on whether certificates could be used as a way for students to enter a master's degree and earn credits towards their degree. As we know, there are many higher education institutions begin to explore some new models of master's education. For example, building on micro-credentials degrees or other stackable credentials. However, findings from this study suggested that there were very few students use certificate as a pathway to enter their master's programs. Figures on the left shows that among students responding to the survey who had certificates prior to starting their master's program, and of those, only about 6.5% transferred their prior certificate credits to their current master's degree. And the figure on the right shows that among students who earn certificates in conjunction with their master's degree, and about 53% of them reported that the certificate credits earned did not count towards their master's degree requirements. So which means that on the other hand, about 47% of the participants reported that the credits they earned through their certificate programs counted towards their master's degree requirements. And so this data suggests that earning certificates could be a cost-effective way of moving into a master's program, may not be the case in reality. So it's very important for us to think about how certificate programs and master's programs could align with each other and to better provide programs that could better aligned. So next, I want to switch gears here away from certificates and to give some more general context in master's education. So we have here on the left the undergrad fields of the respondents, and on the right are their master's fields of study. And one big takeaway here is the prevalence of the other fields. We saw that it's most popular at the undergrad level. About 25.8% of the participants enrolled in other fields in their undergrad, and second most in master's fields, about 17.5%. And another interesting thing to point out is that the increase of business in the master's fields, which it may imply MBA degrees. And this implies that the upskilling from the other different fields to get MBAs, for example, or get degrees in the business schools. And we also saw that the STEM fields more or less remain the same in terms of the transition from their undergrad degree. And the biggest change is in the field of social and behavioral science, where we saw a drop from the undergrad fields to the master's fields. And this figure shows the master's students' transition in and out of STEM fields from their undergrad degrees. As we see here, about 49% of them were never in STEM field, and 23% will remain in STEM for both their undergrad and master's degrees. And about 19% of them left STEM, which means that the students were in STEM fields for their undergrad degree and left STEM for their master's degree. And about 9% of them joined STEM, which means that they were in non-STEM undergrad degree and joined a STEM master's degree. And the majority who left STEM as opposed to joining STEM in their master's fields is an interesting finding of this study. So as we assume that more students are interested in joining STEM fields, since we see that there are increasing demands in STEM workforce, and the STEM and the salaries in the STEM fields tend to be higher compared to other fields. And also another interesting takeaway here is that almost 3/4 of the respondents did not change their field studies from their undergrad. So they either remained in STEM fields or they were never in STEM to begin with. And this implies that the quantitative and qualitative divide is still a strong driver of career path of students' pathways decision making. And this next slides are meant to start some discussion or conversation on the different structural issues associated with STEM pathways. So we know that there are literature showing on the topic of women in STEM and their experience And the data we collected here seems to follow those already existing patterns. And so this figure shows the students who left STEM and joined STEM by gender. And we see that women were more likely to left STEM than men, while men were more likely to have joined STEM than women. And these rates are similar to the overall trend of 19% leaving STEM and about 9% joining STEM. And this speaks to the anecdotal that the STEM fields may create more structural pressure for women compared to men. And then we also look at how women and men choose their master's programs. And we see that there is a bigger difference in terms of gender. So here, this figure shows that about 69% of women were not enrolled in a STEM master programs. While compared to men, about 51% of men were not enrolled in STEM. And again, and on the other hand, we saw that there were 49% of men enrolled in STEM masters compared to 32% of women enrolled in STEM masters. And so again, this raised up questions about the potential experience that women may face in STEM field during their undergrad programs, and that push them away from STEM graduate schools, and as they leave STEM more often than men do. And lastly, in terms of STEM aspiration, we found that men are more likely to aspire to work in a STEM field after their master's program compared to women. And so similarly, this speaks to the same structural issues that women may face that may follow them outside of the classroom and went into the professional world. And we saw that here from the figure. And yeah, we saw that here from the figure, respondent who identify as men were the largest group to aspire to a STEM-related career with a 35%, compared to women, only have about 28% of them indicated that they aspire to work in the STEM field. And lastly, we would like to talk about some data in terms of program satisfaction. So in the survey, we ask participants to rate different aspects of their master's program in a 5-point scale, including curriculum, faculty, advising, the institution in general, their employment assistant, and their overall satisfaction. And from this data, we saw that there were differences in master's program satisfaction among different students. For women who left STEM, they reported higher satisfaction with curriculum and faculty compared to those who joined STEM. And for those who left STEM, men reported a higher satisfaction with advising, institution, and employment assistant compared to women. And we also find that for all students who were never in STEM fields. They were reported higher satisfaction with curriculum, faculty, the institution in general, and overall satisfaction compared to those who remained in the STEM field. And in particular, for those who aspire to work in information technology, reported across the board a higher satisfaction rating for all category relatively to all respondents on average. So that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to the UPCEA team.
Thank you, NU. We do have a question. It's actually back on slide 25. Alyssa is asking, the slide notes that 6.5% did not use credits towards their master's degree. And on that slide, I believe it's referencing from another institution, but 47% of the credits earned through a certificate program could count towards the current master's degree. Would your interpretation, NU, be that institutions maybe aren't allowing those outside credits? Is that a logical conclusion here? From the survey data, I know I can speak anecdotally from my experience, but it's a very small percentage that's actually applying any previous credits.
Yes, I think that your assumption sounds correct. I think from the conversations that we had with our graduate deans, it seems that anecdotally we heard that many of the institutions they are not accepting certificate credits from other institutions. So based on the concerns of such as quality and yeah. So
my former institution used to have an interesting double counting rule where if you earned the credential of a certificate, you couldn't apply those to a degree at our institution. You could apply our own certificate credits towards a degree, which was fascinating. They did, however, modify that during the time that I was there, so they became much more flexible. Thank you. To our attendees, are there other questions you can post in chat? Or please feel free to post in the Q&A as well.
I'm also curious if folks are surprised by that graduate certificate data point, because that was one of the ones that I found most interesting as well, just because we are seeing an increased demand from the student side. It seems like the institutional side is, much like Stacy said, either you do it all here or we're not as interested. And so I'm curious if that's also the case at the institutions that you folks represent. It's a quiet group.
It was a quiet group today.
And what else stood out to you from the study, or maybe some data points that you weren't able to share today that you think would be relevant for this conversation?
Yeah, I think in terms of the certificates, I think you raised important points that so for many of those students who are enrolled in the certificate programs, they are actually enrolled in conjunction with their master's degree. So certificate, it seems like we were assumed that certificate could be a way to increase graduate enrollment, but in fact, it seems that it does not help the increase of enrollment a lot. And it seems like a lot of those students who are already master students and taking the certificate at the same time while they are doing their masters.
Yeah, to me, the conversations I've had is it's almost an insurance policy, right? It's an insurance policy that if you have to drop out, you still have that credential. And the other added benefit too, of course, is that you then have that further specialization. So if you are getting an MBA, for example, which can be quite broad, you might have a specialization in analytics or applied artificial intelligence or what have you. So that was interesting here. I think the other kind of challenge with that very few institutions have actually figured out is financial aid for graduate certificates. There's a handful that I know of that have done an okay job, but I know there's a lot that are exploring it, right? And I think that is a tough nut to crack. When we know that's what student demand says, but also if they're paying for it, which we know they're paying for it more often than they were even 10 years ago, that's a challenge.
Right.
Certificates are also just as rigorous, right? I mean, they're clusters of the
Right.
same graduate courses. And so, that can be tricky to work into the schedule. And thank you to Jan, who shared a bit in the chat as well. Other questions? We're happy to spend a few more minutes. We did carve out time till 3 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, that's interesting, Jan. It took them 2 extra years to get a certificate because of the financial aid snafus. Graduate financial aid is a tricky thing to navigate, period, especially because often our graduate students are working, and so they're not full-time students, which does create some challenges for them. Other questions? Still have quite a few of you in the session.
Alyssa, I'd be curious to know the obstacles that you're running into at your institution. Um, I have a hunch, but I'd be curious to know if those are indeed some of the usual suspects.
And this is a great time just to reinforce that our contact info is all here on this slide. Take a snapshot. Please feel free to reach out. We are happy to have follow-up exchanges, conversations, et cetera. And the link to the work from the Council of Graduate Schools to NU and Alessandro's work is there in the QR code. So please.
Yeah, it's an interesting solution there from Jan, overlapping required courses in the MPA program with the required courses in the certificate. I always find it curious how some of those things are decided, but when it's there in the letter of the law, you can make it work. So that's perfect.
Deb,
I'm sorry.
great question, Deb. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, so micro certificates that stack into certificates that stack into degrees. I love it. We get nesting doll version of credentials. I think it's pretty clear that that would be a student preference in a lot of ways. Some students just want a particular skill, right? They don't necessarily feel like they need all the bells and whistles that's included within. I'll keep picking on an MBA for whatever reason. Maybe they just want to know, how to do applied analytics, right? And that's it. So having something like that where they can have that piece, have the next piece and the following piece and start to count towards it, that's a great move. There's an institute, Rutgers does this with their mini MBA program on the non-credit to credit side. So there are 3 non-credit certificates. I don't remember the specific subject areas, but if you complete all 3, my understanding is that they then waive 3 credits off of the MBA itself, right? So it's a way for them to get around the idea. It's a way for them to implement stacking without having to do some of those other pieces. So I think that if an institution can make it work, and the other big challenge is market it effectively. There are a handful of institutions that are really adamant about a stackable pathway, but I think most of them struggle to communicate that value to students. So I think if you can achieve those things, it's a very successful model if it can be done.
And I'll just note that often those micro units can be more affordable for the learner, which is a
Right.
great thing as well. We do have another question in the Q&A. Lillian is asking, do we think accepting other universities' credits gives a competitive edge when it comes to committing to a program? Love thoughts based on the data. I think NU, I'd love if you can weigh in on that one. I think it's a fascinating notion because we do this a lot in the undergrads on the undergrad side where someone might do an associate's degree at a community college and then we accept those credits in our institutions to transfer into a bachelor's. Do you think this would give a competitive edge if a school was more open to accepting credits earned in another university?
Unfortunately, our data, we didn't collect data uh, on this topic. But I think anecdotally, we do hear that there is some institution started to provide youth certificates programs as a way to provide students access to graduate education, in particular for those students who was not accepted into the master's degree. So students can start to take the certificate in their institutions first and then enroll in their master's.
That's a great point,
program.
because I was formerly with Worcester Polytechnic Institute, former colleague who was on the session today. But we, being a STEM institution, a largely STEM focused institution, there were times that someone's background might not indicate that they were necessarily ready to transition to a STEM master's, and taking a certificate could be a great way to prove yourself. I had mixed feelings about that, because you're still taking the same courses. So you want to be really careful that you're admitting a student who's going to be successful. But I do think it's a great observation.
I'd also be curious of the frequency of how often folks are going to be trying to transfer graduate programs, right? Or change their graduate program from one institution to another. I haven't seen any data out there to suggest what that frequency might be, because it could be a home run of an idea. But it also could be something that is so small, or the market so niche, that it might be, a less fruitful exercise. But I'd be curious to know. That's not something that we've explored.
No, it is fascinating. It's a great point, Bruce, because I would suspect that some of those mega universities that you had on that slide we know they're pretty open in terms of their admissions and sort of what they'll accept. I would suspect that some of those big names are pretty flexible about letting you transfer in. Alyssa's smelling a research proposal coming from this combo, Bruce.
Yeah. Plus bonus points for creative character usage.
Well, thank you so much to all of our attendees today. Again, we do have time carved out, but also recognize that folks are incredibly busy, and most of us don't have any breaks built into our schedules between Zoom meetings. Are there any final questions or comments or thoughts? Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, NU. I'm sorry that Alessandro couldn't join us, but again, his contact info is here, and the project link is in the QR code. We are happy to have our partners at CGS join us here in the UPCEA land, and we look forward to more collaborations in the graduate space.
Thank you all.